Hey there, deep diver. You know how us humans, we go through all this intricate biology to create the next generation? Turns out we're just like scratching the surface of how wild reproduction gets in nature.
It's true. What might seem like a very personal, human-centric topic actually reveals some of the most fundamental forces shaping life on Earth.
Yeah, that's what I love about these deep dives, the unexpected connections. Today, we're taking a page from your biology textbook, the chapter on how do organisms reproduce. We're going beyond baby birds and the birds and the bees to uncover the sheer ingenuity and even ruthlessness of nature's drive to keep life going.
And what's striking about this chapter is how it shifts our perspective. We often think of reproduction as ensuring the survival of an individual's genes, right? But it's more accurate to see it as a species-wide gamble for survival in a constantly changing world.
Okay, so it's bigger than just one generation making another.
Exactly. The chapter emphasizes how crucial variation is within a species. Think of it like this. If every organism were genetically identical, a single disease or environmental shift could wipe them all out.
Like a monoculture crop, vulnerable to one blight and it's all over.
Precisely. Now, our textbook explains that DNA copying, while generally accurate, isn't always perfect. These tiny errors mutations are where things get interesting.
So those typos in the DNA instruction manual are actually what create the variation that evolution works with. Mind-blowing.
Exactly. Most mutations have negligible effects. But every now and then, one pops up that gives an organism a slight edge in survival or reproduction. And that advantage gets passed down to its offspring.
So using that bacteria in a pond example from the textbook, let's say the temperature suddenly rises. Only the bacteria with a mutation giving them a little extra heat tolerance survive. They reproduce and boom, the next generation is better equipped for a warmer pond.
You've got it.
Mhm.
And this chapter brilliantly illustrates how this principle plays out across the spectrum of life, from simple cell division to the complexities of sexual reproduction. Speaking of which, did you find the section on flowering plants as fascinating as I did?
The part about pollination strategies, okay, I have to admit, I always took flowers for granted. Yes, but who knew there was so much strategy going on?
It's remarkable how they've evolved these incredibly intricate mechanisms to ensure cross-pollination. The chapter gives the example of orchids that have evolved to look and even smell like female insects, tricking males into trying to mate with them. In the process, the unsuspecting insects pick up pollen and carry it to other orchids.
Talk about a bait and switch. It's like a whole botanical soap opera playing out.
It really is. And it's not just orchids. The chapter explains how some flowers have evolved landing platforms perfectly suited to specific pollinators, guiding them right where the pollen needs to be.
It's like they've developed their own little air traffic control systems. So we've got bacteria adapting to heat orchids running a dating service. It's clear that nature has come up with some pretty wild ways to ensure genetic diversity.
It's a constant dance between fidelity and variation. And as the chapter takes us from simpler organisms towards more complex ones, these strategies only become more intricate and fascinating.
Which leads us to the most complex organism of all us. The textbook doesn't shy away from the nitty-gritty of human reproduction, and I have to say, even with a basic understanding, it's pretty amazing how it all comes together.
It's a testament to the power of evolution, that such a complex process has evolved to ensure the continuation of our species. But what's crucial to remember, and what this chapter highlights so well, is that with sexual maturity comes a whole host of responsibilities.
It's not just about biology at that point, right? The chapter really dives into the social and ethical aspects, too.
Absolutely. The chapter emphasizes the importance of reproductive health responsible choices and understanding the impact of our actions, not just on an individual level, but on a global scale.
So we're talking about things like access to contraception, the ethics of reproductive technologies, and even the complex issue of population growth.
Exactly.
Oh.
And this is where the chapter takes us beyond the biology textbook and asks us to grapple with some of the most pressing questions facing humanity today. Because ultimately, reproduction isn't just about making more of us. It's about understanding the intricate web of life that connects us all and making choices that ensure a healthy and sustainable future for generations to come.
It's fascinating how this chapter connects the dots between like individual choices and these larger global issues.
It really highlights that tension between our individual drive to reproduce and the responsibility we have to the well-being of our species and the planet as a whole.
It's almost like a paradox, right? The very act that ensures life continues could also be contributing to challenges if we're not careful.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where understanding the nuances of reproduction beyond the basics becomes so crucial. The chapter does a great job of delving into those nuances, starting with the different ways organisms have evolved to reproduce.
Right. It's not all just like humans or even just sexual reproduction. I was blown away by the sheer variety of methods out there.
The diversity is astounding. The chapter section on asexual reproduction was particularly interesting. Take the example of the malarial parasite Plasmodium. It reproduces through multiple fission, where a single cell divides into numerous daughter cells simultaneously.
Whoa, it's like cloning on overdrive. No wonder it's so hard to develop a vaccine for malaria. It's like trying to hit a moving target that keeps splitting into more targets.
Exactly. This strategy allows for rapid population growth and introduces variation, making it a formidable opponent in the evolutionary arms race. And then there's budding, like we see in yeast.
Oh, yeah, I remember that experiment from back in the day. Watching those tiny buds emerge from the yeast cells under the microscope was like witnessing miniature life exploding into existence.
It's a great visual, isn't it?
Yeah.
Each bud is a genetically distinct individual carrying slight variations from its parent. It's a simple yet effective way for these organisms to introduce genetic diversity into their populations.
So even single-celled organisms have these incredible strategies to mix things up genetically. And then there are plants, which the textbook says can reproduce in some pretty wild ways.
Vegetative propagation is a prime example. The textbook's example of the bryophyllum plant really stood out.
Yeah, the whole pluck a leaf, grow a new plant thing. Like, how does that even work? It's like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Right. The chapter explains that specialized cells in certain plant parts can divide and differentiate, eventually forming all the different cell types needed to create a whole new plant. It's incredibly efficient and allows plants to reproduce even in harsh conditions where seed production might be difficult.
It's like they have a built-in backup plan. No wonder plants are so resilient. But speaking of resilience, let's circle back to human reproduction. The chapter doesn't shy away from the complexities, and I have to say it's humbling to realize how much we take for granted.
Absolutely. We often focus on the biological mechanics, but the chapter rightly emphasizes that human reproduction is about so much more than just biology. It's intricately intertwined with our emotions, our social structures, and our values.
And the chapter really tackles that head-on when it delves into the topic of puberty. It's not just about the physical changes, but also the emotional and social development that happens alongside those changes.
It's a time of profound transformation, and the chapter acknowledges the importance of navigating this period with sensitivity and awareness. It emphasizes the need for open communication about sex reproduction and the responsibilities that come with sexual maturity.
Right. It's not just about the birds and the bees anymore. It's about understanding consent, respecting boundaries, and making responsible choices for ourselves and our partners.
Exactly. The chapter goes beyond the mechanics of reproduction and encourages us to consider the ethical dimensions of our actions. This is especially important when discussing topics like contraception and reproductive technologies, which give us greater control over our reproductive choices, but also raise complex ethical dilemmas.
It's a lot to unpack, but it's clear that the conversation about human reproduction can't be limited to biology textbooks. It needs to happen in our homes, our schools, and our communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that conversation needs to be nuanced, informed, and compassionate. We need to create spaces where young people feel comfortable asking questions, exploring their own values, and making informed decisions about their reproductive health.
It's about empowering individuals to make choices that are right for them, while also being mindful of the broader social and ethical implications of those choices.
Precisely. And this brings us back to the chapter's discussion of population growth. It's a topic often fraught with controversy, but the chapter approaches it thoughtfully, prompting us to consider the interconnectedness of our individual choices and global well-being.
So it's about more than just like how many people are on the planet, right? It's about how we're using resources impacting the environment and ensuring equity for all.
Exactly. The chapter challenges us to move beyond simplistic solutions and engage in a more nuanced conversation about sustainable population growth.
A conversation that takes into account social justice, environmental responsibility, and the well-being of future generations.
Precisely. The chapter reminds us that reproduction, for all its wonder and complexity, is ultimately about more than just making more of us. It's about creating a future where all life can thrive.
It really is amazing when you think about it, how this one chapter can bring together biology and ethics and social responsibility, even the future of the planet. It's a lot to think about.
It really is. It speaks to how interconnected everything really is. And what stands out to me is how the chapter highlights the power of evolution. It's not just some force from way back when. It's shaping life right now as we speak. It's a constant process.
Yeah, that's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it. So we've covered a lot of ground here. The amazing variety of ways that organisms reproduce, from single cells dividing to, the complexities of human relationships. But if you had to kind of sum it all up, what are your biggest takeaways from this deep dive?
I think first and foremost, this chapter reminds us that reproduction isn't static. It's always changing. It's a dynamic force driving adaptation and innovation and diversity. We see it in all the different reproductive strategies out there in nature, like those orchids we talked about, or plants that can reproduce from just a single leaf. It's really incredible.
It's like nature is always experimenting, trying new things to see what works.
Exactly. And the chapter also makes us reconsider our assumptions about human reproduction. We tend to focus on individual choices, but those choices actually impact the whole system. Everything from population growth to how we use resources. It's all connected.
It's humbling in a way, right? Knowing that we're not just individuals making choices, but part of this much larger web of life.
Absolutely. And finally, this chapter challenges us to think about the future. What kind of world do we want to leave for the generations that come after us? Because reproduction isn't just about making more humans. It's about ensuring a future where all life can thrive.
It's about making sure that evolution keeps going, that constant dance between variation and adaptation. It's about our kids inheriting a world full of wonder and possibilities and yeah, maybe even a few more orchids up to their tricky ways.
Well said. And that's what I think makes this chapter so fascinating. It's not just about the mechanics of how reproduction works. It's about understanding that our choices have profound implications and that we have the power to shape the future of life on Earth.
I love it when we can bring it all together like that. Well, Deep Diver, I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of reproduction. It's complex and surprising and reminds us just how interconnected we all are. Until next time, keep those curious minds buzzing.